and welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week is a special one and actually a collaboration between myself and Rich Napolitano from Shipwrecks and Seadogs. Rich and I are both located in the Tampa area in Florida and have been working on this collaboration for you guys. So with that, let's get right into it.
Hi, everybody. I am Rich Napolitano of Shipwrecks and Seadogs.
And I'm Madison from It's a History Podcast.
We are both history podcasters, and we both happen to live in the Tampa Bay area. And we started interacting on social media and decided, hey, we should collaborate. So we're going to talk a little bit about a local Tampa Bay shipwreck.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this shipwreck, especially since it is very close to home. I figured since we are both in the Tampa Bay area to cover something that was, kind of like a local history for us, I think that would be a nice way to collaborate.
Yeah, and I think it's going to have some broader appeal too, because it happens to be here in the Tampa Bay area, but it was a Civil War era wreck. And of course, we're talking about the USS Narcissus. Not a really well-known story. In fact, to be honest, I had never heard of it. And you brought it to my attention.
I had also never heard of it. When I was looking for something to bring to the show, I'm like, okay, let me look through his back catalog and see what he's got. And then I was like, okay, shipwrecks near Tampa, Florida. And it was far down on some of the lists, but it was there.
Let's go ahead and we'll begin telling the story here. Now, in order to fully understand the role of USS Narcissus and ships of its time, it's important to understand first the context during which it was built and put into service. Now, this is a vast oversimplification of an extremely complex historical event. But for those not familiar with the American Civil War, it will provide some background for you. From April of 1861 through May of 1865, the United States was at war with itself. The American Civil War was a period of tremendous divisive conflict. It pitted brother against brother, family against family, in a bitter struggle over how and if the still young country would endure. Military technology had outpaced military tactics, and it resulted in indescribable carnage. 7 southern states seceded from the Union by March of 1861, and they set up provisional governments. 6 more would do the same before the end of the year. These 13 southern states then declared themselves as a new nation, the Confederate States of America, and they named former U.S. Secretary of War and Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis as its president. In opposition to the Confederacy were the remaining northern states, which were referred to as the Union, with newly elected President Abraham Lincoln at its head.
The northern states were heavily reliant on manufacturing, producing the massive majority of firearms, railroad, locomotives, textiles, and iron, and had by far a more extensive railroad network. The Union also had an existing army and many more naval ships. The southern states were largely agrarian, producing cash crops such as cotton, rice, sugar, and tobacco. Large plantations across the South utilized slave labor, mostly Africans, to produce the massive amounts of goods that were transported to northern states in Europe. At the start of the war, President Abraham Lincoln instituted a naval blockade along 3,000 miles of the Confederate coastline, from Virginia around Florida to the Rio Grande separating Texas from Mexico. The goal of the Union was to prevent Southern goods from being exported to Europe and to stop war material from being smuggled into key Southern ports such as Wilmington, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, Mobile, Alabama, and New Orleans, Louisiana.
The blockade proved to be only moderately successful. It's estimated that 90% or more of cotton exports were blocked, causing a desperate shortage for the British and French textile industry. However, blockade runners were far more successful in bringing in guns, ammunition, and other war material, sometimes directly from Europe, but most often through neutral ports in Cuba, the Bahamas, and Bermuda. Despite the naval advantage held by the Union, its blockade was porous, and more ships were needed to further restrict trade in and out of southern ports. The U.S. Navy couldn't possibly build ships fast enough, and so it sought to purchase suitable private ships. The vessel that became USS Narcissus began its career as the screw tug steamer Mary Cook, built at the East Albany Shipyard of New York. Launched in July of 1863, she was just under 82 feet in length, had a draft of 6 feet, and could reach speeds up to 14 knots. The vessel was armed with one 20-pounder Parrott rifle and one heavy 12-pound smoothbore cannon.
The Mary Cook was purchased by the U.S. Navy from James D. Stevenson on the 23rd of September, 1863. She was renamed USS Narcissus and commissioned into service at the New York Navy Yard on February 2nd, 1864, with Acting Ensign William G. Jones in command. The light draft of the Narcissus and vessels like it were highly valued, as they could easily follow blockade runners into shallow waters along the coastline. A month earlier, in January 1864, the USS Narcissus steamed from New York all the way down to New Orleans, where she would report to Rear Admiral David Farragut in the West Gulf Blockading Squadron. While down south, the USS Narcissus participated in multiple operations, including operations in Mississippi Sound, New Orleans, Mobile Bay, and Pensacola, even serving at Fort Morgan during a Union victory at the Battle of Mobile Bay. The first sinking of the USS Narcissus would be on December 7, 1864, after she struck a torpedo, what we call a mine today, while on picket duty at Dog River Bar, Mobile Bay. At the time she hit the torpedo, she was paying out her anchor during a rather gnarly storm. The torpedo left a large hole in the starboard side of the ship, and the ship sank quickly in just 15 minutes. No lives were lost in this first sinking.
Just a few weeks later, on December 8, 1864, Narcissus was refloated and transported to the Pensacola Naval Yard to repair the damage done by the torpedo. Narcissus would remain at the Naval Yard for the remainder of the Civil War. In October 1865, the decision was made that USS Narcissus and the USS Althea would be sent north to be commissioned and sold. While the USS Narcissus and the USS Althea were en route alongside the eastern shore of the Gulf of Mexico, they encountered a storm just off the coast of Tampa on January 4, 1866. The two ships decided to take different approaches to the storm, with USS Althea heading northwest against the tide, while the commanders aboard USS Narcissus decided to set anchor and ride out the storm.
USS Narcissus, attempting to avoid shallow water, headed full speed into a sandbar. In just under an hour after running into the sandbar, the USS Narcissus would experience her second sinking. It should be noted that the USS Althea had also been briefly grounded by a sandbar, but was eventually able to free herself from the sand. The same could not be said for the USS Narcissus. After hitting the sandbar, the crew of the Althea, who watched this entire event happen, logged that they noticed signal flares coming from the Narcissus at 6:15 p.m. The Narcissus would send more signals about a half hour later, but the crew on the Althea were not able to understand what they meant. The Althea did return the signal, but received no response from the crew on board the Narcissus. Just after 7 p.m., the crew of the Althea watched as the boiler exploded on the Narcissus, and the ship itself broke apart and sank into the water, taking all of the crew with her.
It's not surprising that those sandbars were run aground because you probably know the sandbars in that area can be very treacherous, especially in low tide. They may have thought they were going toward clear water, but not surprising there in those waters.
Especially if it was a high tide time period, you would have no idea that the sandbar was there. And they can be quite high, close to the surface, and still be rather hidden with that much water over them.
And they shift quite a bit too in the current, so from one year to the next, those sandbars are different. Acting Ensign William F. Kilgore of USS Althea brought his ship back toward Egmont Key in the morning hours of January 5th, when the seas had calmed. He anchored off the wharf near the Egmont Lighthouse and observed wreckage from the Narcissus. The beach was littered with papers, debris, and items of clothing belonging to Acting Ensign Bradbury and mate John L. Hall. One body was found, recognized as a fireman from Narcissus, and he was buried on Egmont Key. No survivors and no other bodies were found. Ensign Kilgore sent his report to Navy headquarters in 1866, but much later in 1889 sent another letter to the Navy, apologizing for not being more thorough, writing, "We found about 1/3 of the hull bottom up and held there by her anchors." Kilgore communicated his report to Commander C.C. Hemmings of USS Sagamore, estimating 9 officers and 24 crewmen were on board Narcissus, adding, "As near as I can tell, the U.S. steamer Narcissus was wrecked northwest by north, distant 4 miles from Egmont Key Lighthouse."
In the weeks following the loss of the Narcissus, news spread throughout newspapers in the northern states. One such article appeared in the New York Times on February 4th, 1866, with details provided by an Ensign Lannon. who had just arrived in New York from Key West on board the steamer New Bern. According to Lannon, acting ensigns Bradbury of the Narcissus and Kilgore of the Althea agreed to anchor outside the harbor of Egmont Key for the night as the weather worsened.
But immediately following this, according to Ensign Lannon, the wind picked up significantly. Kilgore suggested that both vessels head further out to sea where it would be safer from grounding, and Bradbury agreed. But before those maneuvers could commence, the wind blew Narcissus to the west, with the full force of the wind battering her starboard side. Kilgore took the Althea further out to sea, directly against the wind while battling waves, grounding on sandbars several times. Kilgore saw a signal light message from Narcissus but did not understand its meaning. The Narcissus then disappeared under the waves, and nothing more was seen or heard from her.
When a naval ship is lost, it is customary for the Secretary of the Navy to initiate an investigation, if feasible. In the case of the Narcissus, it was not feasible. A 1903 document from the United States Navy Record Office states, "The Narcissus was lost on the 4th of January 1866 in the Gulf of Mexico. She was a small tug commanded by an acting ensign who was deemed an efficient officer, was driven ashore in a terrific storm and lost with all on board. No investigation possible." No known attempts to salvage USS Narcissus were undertaken by the U.S. Navy or any other parties, and the Narcissus lay forgotten in the sand for over 100 years.
In 1983, recreational diver Carl Lear happened across wreckage of a ship in the waters off Egmont Key. Lear didn't have any information about what he had found, what type of ship it was, or its name. He and fellow diver George Cox returned to the wreck, and between 1983 and 1988, excavated a long list of artifacts from the wreck site, including iron shackles, handcuffs, brass keys, a silver fork engraved Landis, a solid shot about 3.5 inches in diameter, percussion rifles, brass spikes, brass sheathing, a battered copper oil can, an assortment of brass valves, and a Confederate brass belt buckle.
Lear and Cox believed they had found the Confederate blockade runner Landis and sought salvage partners to excavate. A number of partnerships with various organizations, including World Treasure Hunters Incorporated, ultimately did not pan out for a number of reasons. In 1988, Mr. Howard Tower conducted a general survey of the site before any further excavation could be done. His report, which was shared with the state of Florida, described the condition of the wreck's exposed engine, boiler, propeller, and propeller shaft, adding that ceiling planks, frame, and exterior planks were also protruding from the wreck. Mr. Tower did not remove anything from the site during this dive. No other items have been taken from the wreck site after 1988.
Tower, along with Lear and Cox, applied for a permit to salvage the site in 1989, but their application was denied by the state of Florida, as the wreck site is within the Pinellas County Aquatic Preserve. Tower continued to research the site, however, and through naval records was able to determine the wreck as that of USS Narcissus. The Institute for International Maritime Research investigated the wreck in 1999, working with agencies from the state of Florida to find shipwrecks in Florida waters. Using side-scan sonar and divers, archaeologists relocated the site and mapped the visible portions of the engine and other machinery.
In 2005, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contracted with Pan American Consultants to evaluate the site and determined it was eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. It was determined to be eligible, and a 500-foot buffer zone was created around the site to protect its integrity. 2006 brought further investigation of the site when the Florida Aquarium in Tampa received a grant to conduct its planned Tampa Bay Historical Shipwreck Survey. In conjunction with Southeastern Archaeological Services and Tidewater Atlantic Research, a volunteer dive team of Casey Coy, Michael Terrell, Billy Ray Morris, and Nicole Tumbleson Morris found the wreck to be more exposed than it had been in the past, and began a full archaeological evaluation. While it was strongly believed to be the wreck of the USS Narcissus, no hard evidence had ever been found to confirm its identity.
This team mapped the wreck's precise location and provided thorough details of the ship's engine, boiler, stern assembly, and buried hull section. 3D images were created of the site, giving researchers incredible detail of the remains. In 2015, the site was declared Florida's 12th underwater archaeological preserve in a ceremony that was hosted by the Florida Department of State, the Florida Aquarium, and the Southeastern Archaeological Services. The dedication ceremony included a live interactive broadcast with aquarium scuba divers diving around the wreck. A bronze plaque was unveiled to designate the new preserve, and 2 direct descendants from the USS Narcissus crew were in attendance. As with the prior 11 designated underwater archaeological sites, the underwater bronze plaque notes the site for divers exploring the area.
The Florida Division of Historical Resources explains that underwater archaeology is one of the best ways to explore these sites before they erode or are destroyed. Shipwrecks are a moment in time that underwater archaeologists can explore to see how, at least in Florida's case, how people traveled the Florida waters before our time. In 2019, Florida Secretary of State Laurel Lee announced that the USS Narcissus shipwreck site would be designated on the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register of Historic Places is a list maintained by the National Park Service that outlines the historical or archaeological buildings, sites, structures, objects, and districts that have been considered worthy of preservation. The state of Florida currently has over 1,700 listings on the register, with over 50,000 individual sites contributing to the National Register in Florida.
The wreck is currently maintained by the Friends of USS Narcissus, who conduct periodic visits to the site to clean the plaque, monitor the site, especially after its prior looting, and to teach the importance of historic preservation. If you want to take a look at the USS Narcissus wreck or any of the other 11 wreck sites that are a part of Florida's underwater archaeological preserve, you can visit museumsinthesea.com, where video and images of the wreck site are available.
After a ship sinks and becomes part of the landscape of the ocean floor, it does not take long for marine life to move in. Marine life, including hard and soft corals, various fish, sponges, sand dollars, and hermit crabs, cluster around wrecks for protection. Today, the wreck of the USS Narcissus serves as a stand-in reef for local marine life. If divers visit during clear conditions, they can see the steamship's single-cylinder engine, a 4-bladed iron propeller, the hull structure, and boiler fragments. The site itself is just 2.7 miles west of Egmont Key, near the mouth of Tampa Bay, Florida, 15 feet underwater, and is a popular site for divers and snorkelers to visit.
All right. That's USS Narcissus. Thank you, Madison.
Yes, thank you.
Have you ever been to Egmont Key?
I have not. When I was in college, one of my last classes that I was able to take in person before the pandemic was, I can't remember what it was called, but we had a couple of professionals like in the archaeological space come in and show us some things that they did. And we had one who came in and he gave us like a 45-minute lecture all about Egmont Key. And all of the various research that he had done on it. So I haven't been there, but I've had lots of experience with people teaching me about it.
Opposite for me. I haven't had anybody tell me about it, but I've been there.
Oh, cool.
It's a nice ferry ride out to the Key, and it's one of the most beautiful beaches I've ever been on. It's pristine, white sand. It's really well known for collecting shells. There's just a very minimal amount of remnants of human existence there, a little bit of concrete here and there, but the lighthouse is still there, and you can see remnants of the wharf that used to be there. It's pretty cool. It's very natural. There's no snack shop. There's no gift shop. There aren't even any restrooms. It's just an island, and it's beautiful.
I'm definitely putting it on the list of places to visit in the area.
Yeah, it's easy. You just take the ferry from Fort DeSoto right out to Egmont Key. It's beautiful. It's a nice ride, too.
Yeah, ferry rides are always, I like a good ferry ride.
Well, again, I'm Rich Napolitano of Shipwrecks and Seadogs.
And I'm Madison from It's a History Podcast.
And I hope you've enjoyed this collaboration. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you so much. I just want to say thanks again to Rich for suggesting that we do an episode together. It was really fun working on an episode with someone else, and I'm very happy with the final result. If you enjoyed the content of this episode, I highly recommend that you head over to Rich's podcast, Shipwrecks and Seadogs. Rich has an extensive backlog of all things maritime history, and his episodes are just such a great listen. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me over on Instagram and Threads at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.